Good evening, all. I am Enco Siard with the Montgomery County Planning Department. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is a virtual meeting on the University Boulevard corridor plan. If it is the first time you're joining us, thank you for participating. We've been doing these meetings both in person as well as virtually. Last week was in person, and then tonight is the virtual meeting. Same format. Same information will be shared. So if you missed it, the in-person meeting, you'll have the opportunity to see what was presented. So along with me tonight, there are some of my other colleagues that are working on this corridor plan. So with me is Zubin, Adrian Vela, Luisa Estrada, one of our urban designers, as well as Miss Natasha Fahim, Miss Jessica McVeer, the master plan supervisor, Kerry Sanders, the division chief for Mid-County, where this plan is located. Alex Rixey, our transportation planner. Steve Finley, our environmental planner. John Weiberts, who is our historic planner. We also have Lisa Gavoni wearing multiple hats, especially on housing. We also have Chuck Kynes with the Parks Department. And we should have Robert Cronenberg with us, the Deputy Planning Director. So we have a full team able to answer questions that you may have later in the presentation. So next slide. So this is our overview. So we'll give, I have about 20 slides, and then there'll be a break for Q&A based on some of the planning policies, as well as framework items, and then we'll get into the emerging ideas, and then any additional Q&A. We're also going to have some polling that Zubin will do. So with that, we will go to the next slide. So again, similar ground rules as if you've participated in our prior virtual meetings. We're going to be respectful. There'll be some lively, active polling. Any comments, just direct them to specific staff, etc. So next slide. Q&A function, just utilize that. This meeting is recorded. It will be posted online. So again, if you missed anything from the in-person conversation, you'll get this meeting as well in terms of the presentation and the different questions from the attendees from tonight's meeting. So this is a comprehensive plan. So we're looking at the built environment, the natural environment, social environment coming out from general plan update, also called Tribe Montgomery 2050. That's the county's long range general plan that looks at multiple decades regarding how Montgomery County should be a better place moving forward from when the council approved the document, which was last year. Next slide. So in brief, you've seen this before, but just to orient people, if you're not participated in prior meetings, is that this corridor plan is from the Beltway going all the way to Amherst and Wheaton. Right near WTOP is another landmark for you, the WTOP transmission towers. It's roughly 3.5 miles. It's a state-controlled roadway. That means the Maryland Department of Transportation, State Highway Administration, so the operator of the right-of-way, the public right-of-way that exists today. We have a variety of transit routes, both Montgomery County ride-on services. Several routes serve the corridor as well as the adjacent residential and commercial areas. It is important for us in terms of our planning work. It is a bus rapid transit corridor or BRT corridor coming out from the 2013 countywide transit corridors functional plan. Next slide. A bit on demographics. We have roughly 3,400 residential units within the plan area, and that's within the dark dotted lines that you see that's running along University Boulevard, MD 193. It's a mix of residents within the plan area in terms of from an ethnic makeup perspective. We have a variety of languages that are spoken within the plan area, including Spanish and Chinese. Next slide. So as I noted, roughly 3,400 plus or minus units. We have a range of detached residential as well as townhouses that were built via 1980s, early 90s, some early 2000s. Um, Most of the multifamily built in the late 1960s, and that sort of clustered at the intersection of Arcola and University Boulevard, and that includes Arcola Towers, the Warwick, and University Towers, which are residential condos. Next slide. Briefly on land use, existing uses. So just to orient you in terms of the colors you see on the screen, those that are in blue includes public institutions or religious institutions. So we have Blair High School, which is down at an intersection at 29 and University. We also have Northwood High within the plan area boundary. Um, we have a variety of religious institutions, St. Bernadette near Blair. We also have Good Shepherd along this portion of University. We also have Luther Rice right across the street. We have a few synagogues as well within the plan area. So we have a variety of public as well as religious institutions. The red is primarily commercial businesses. Those are primarily within the Four Corners area, as well as in the Camp Mill shopping, as well as along Amherst. We also have, as I noted earlier, multifamily at the intersection of Arcola and University. The green is primarily parks or open space. We have Cycle Creek, a portion of that running through the plan area, as well as existing parks such as Wheaton Forest, as well as North Four Corners local park shown in green. And then everything else in terms of the more lighter yellow color are detached residential, or in some cases, we have as well residential townhouses. Next slide. Zoning is a key aspect to some of the work that we'll be doing on this plan. And much of the area is within a residential zone. So that's either R60, that's 6,000 square foot minimum lot size, or 9,000 square foot for our 90 zones. In 2014, the county council did a comprehensive update on the county zoning ordinance and implemented and approved new zoning categories within the Four Corners area. And those properties are now within a commercial residential town zone that permits both residential and non-residential uses. Likewise, the neighborhood retail zone, that's the area here in red, this is for Kemp Mill. And then blue, here are two planned development zones. Those are prior zones from the zoning ordinance that predated the council changes in 2014. And that's planned development, that's an older zone. So as we move forward on this work for this quarter plan, we'll be updating some of the planned development zones as well as the residential townhouse zones. Those are the two zoning categories that we cannot reestablish when we do a new plan. Next slide. A bit of information regarding market conditions regarding the residential market. By and large, in terms of for a rental unit in this area, it's roughly $1,700. In terms of for sale, it's a little bit less than $600,000, which is comparative to some of the other parts of Montgomery County. It's not as high as some of the areas such as North Bethesda or Silver Spring, but it's still relatively affordable. Next slide. And a brief more in terms of some of the market analysis that's been done in terms of the work that we did, both internally as well as additional consultant help that we received as part of this planning effort so far. Much of the area predominantly residential. We do have two distinct areas that are nearby. That's downtown Silver Spring as well as Wheaton. That sort of bookends both areas. Um, do have a significant presence of institutional uses with religious a variety of religious institutions, followed by retail in terms of the amount of space. And then there's some amount of forecast potential opportunities with more residential potentially could come into the area that will begin to add more different sort of retail presence within the corridor plan area. Next slide. So since we started this plan in November of 2022, we've had a variety of uh, both in-person, virtual meetings as well. As I noted, we had a meeting last week. Also last week, we had another community association meeting with the South Fork Corners community that was highly well attended. And we've done a variety of things over that time since November 2022, in terms from mailers, working with everyday canvassing to go into the multifamily developments to make sure we inform people of this project, as well as using different opportunities to sort of partner with some of the Latino slash Hispanic communities or groups within this plan area to sort of spread the word that way. And we've taken this approach to have both in-person and virtual meetings in terms of our outreach within this plan. Next slide. So in terms of what we've heard, this is a lot of work that my colleague Zubin has done regarding sort of combining and listening and documenting all the different, from polls to the different things we've done online, is that people value the diversity of the area. And a lot of them want to walk either along the corridor or figure out better connections along the corridor. Biking infrastructure is also needed. There's significant value of having Cycle Creek, an area, and figuring out ways to get better access to it. Sort of a demand for better access, for better food, better public spaces. And then in terms of quality of housing and affordability and availability, that's another issue that we've heard in terms of information that we've received so far. Next slide. So this is where we sort of get into this part of this presentation, talking about some of the sort of planning framework types and different things that we do at a planning department, if you're not familiar with some of the work that we do. So as I mentioned earlier, Thrive Montgomery 2050, that's the general plan, multi-decade perspective to that document. The last comprehensive one was done in the 1960s. There was one that was there was an update that was done in 1993. So as you can see, in terms of time, these documents for the general plan, they come up not very frequently. So that was done after several years of work and finally approved by the council. We also do functional plans or countywide initiatives, and typically a functional plan will focus on one specific one specific use or item, such as biking. We have a bikeway master plan, functional plan from several years ago. We also have a transit corridor plan from 2013 that looks out in terms of where more transit can occur within the county. We also do master sector plans or corridor plans, which are more linear in their orientation. And then we also have a development review function. That means any private development that's not within the municipalities, such as Rockville and Gaithersburg, those jurisdictions have their own land use and zoning controls. So everything else we review both on any private development, and we also review public projects in terms of roadways or new schools, etc., via the mandatory referral review process that the agency has. We also do a variety of studies and and updates regarding multiple things such as housing. So those are some of the things that we do as a department. Next slide. So a bit more on general plan update, Tribe Montgomery 2050. Um, as I mentioned, is looking out multiple decades, but some of the key ideas in terms of Thrive Montgomery 2050 is focusing on new growth opportunities within the downtown areas, and those downtowns are mostly places that we're familiar with today: North Bethesda, Silver Spring, Wheaton, etc. But also highlighting a greater emphasis on some of the key corridors, such as University Boulevard, Georgia Avenue, Route 29, etc. Emphasizing walking, biking, and transit. Thinking about public health within the land use planning framework, seeking opportunities to enhance our parks and open spaces that we have today, and thinking about climate change and sort of thinking about how we could establish more resiliency as the climate continues to change, as we can continue to live. Next slide. So what you have on the screen is a map from the general plan. Uh, and it begins to show where some of the growth corridors are called for. Those are the areas shown in black, such as along I-270, as well as this area here in red is included portion of this plan for University Boulevard, as well as other corridors within the county, such as Randolph Road, Route 29, Rockville Pike. Those are just some of the corridors that are called for. And then the little circles are different sort of centers that are called for as well within the general plan in terms of large places like Bethesda, more medium places like Burtonsville or Germantown, and then some smaller centers, such as Aspen Hill. The purple line is shown here as well, another key infrastructure item that's called for. So the general plan, again, highlighting the importance of corridors and figuring out a way that we could, over multiple decades, begin to provide different sorts of uses along much of the county's corridors. Next slide. In addition to the general plan, the council in 2021 requested the planning board to examine the attainable housing initiative. This is coming out from a zoning text amendment that was introduced by Council Member Jawando that proposed making changes to the single family, especially the R60 zone, and I believe the R90 as well, in terms of adding additional uses to those zones. And before acting, the council wanted to have more understanding what's typically in some cases called missing middle. That means different sorts of unit types besides a townhouse or multifamily. These are older typologies of residential developments that we haven't seen in multiple decades in Montgomery County or other parts of this region. And those are like duplexes, triplexes, sort of smaller apartment buildings. So my colleague Lisa Gavoni and others have been working with the planning board. They've had multiple work sessions, and they will be sending out their recommendations to the council probably later this summer regarding this initiative. And this will have a sort of countywide focus, not only for University Boulevard, but all parts of Montgomery County, depending on what decisions at the end of the day the council makes on the attainable housing initiative. Next slide. And some of the goals in terms of attainable housing is really to seeking to provide different sort of unit types, providing more housing options or supply for people with various means of income. Thinking about how we could sort of diversify the detached residential zones within the county, and again providing both home ownership and also rental opportunities for the different household needs that we have. Next slide. Another initiative that was recently passed is a zoning text amendment, and a zoning text amendment is an approval by the county council that changes either uses or standards that pertain to a particular zone within the county zoning ordinance. So, zoning text amendment 24-01 allows religious assembly uses, that's churches, synagogues, etc., as well as private institutional uses, to have on their properties now multi-unit housing and townhouses. So this is obviously important regarding University Boulevard because we have a variety of churches as well as other religious institutions on different parts of the corridor. So then there are certain income thresholds that this zoning text amendment um, provides for any religious institution or private educational institution in terms of their potential redevelopment that they have to provide once they're redeveloped. But it's an important additional change recently enacted by the council. Next slide. Switching a little bit to some of the transportation framework items that have been approved in the last couple of years. One is a complete streets design guide that begins to look at how we can make streets in Montgomery County safer for all roadway users, especially pedestrians, excuse me, as well as people that are wanting to choose to bike. But sort of thinking holistically of as we focus on corridors, we focus on getting people around different parts of the county. We want to think about it from a safety perspective. This adds into the county's commitment towards Vision Zero in terms of making sure that there are no vehicular accidents and crashes, etc. But sort of coming up, thinking holistically regarding different streets within the county. So two images on the bottom portion of this slide is giving you sort of perspectives regarding what's a boulevard in terms of providing specific spaces for people that want to walk, people that want to bike, where we should potentially have transit, either down the middle or in a shared configuration. Likewise, the Town Center Boulevard, another typology that gives you another picture regarding sidewalk, making sure we have sort of a landscape buffer where the sidewalk is not adjacent to the travel lane like what we have today for University Boulevard. Next slide. As I think I mentioned earlier, the countywide transit corridors functional plan. This dates back a little while from 2013, but it provides 11 distinct bus rapid transit corridors countywide. What's shown here is University Boulevard between Tacoma Park Transit Center to Wheaton. The area in red is calling for sort of dedicated space for bus rapid transit, as well as the area at Four Corners in yellow, considering mixed traffic. So there's a lot going on in Four Corners. It also identified a variety of BRT stops. These are these little circles here. You have Amherst, Inwood, or Kohler, some of the stops that are called for in the transit corridors plan. And as part of this effort, we're examining those recommendations, and it will be either adjusted or confirmed as part of our work in terms of this corridor plan. Next slide. And then another bigger countywide functional plan, Bikeway Master Plan, that's looking at a variety of new typologies, again, within all major streets, including University Boulevard, where it's recommending a site path as well as a recommendation for a breezeway. That's the sort of a higher quality biking infrastructure. But as part of this planning effort for University Boulevard that we're undertaking, we're going to be re-examining and seeing where this recommendation coming out from the Bikeway Master Plan that we'll be making potential adjustments to it regarding the limitations on the right of way that we are working within. Next slide. Okay, so this is part of the presentation where I'll do a pause for any framework Q&A questions. And Zubin, I will knock on your door to see if you have any questions coming in as they pertain to some of the overarching framework plans, etc. That is part of the presentation.
I'm just waiting for any framework questions. There are some other questions that have come in, but I think we can hold them to the very end.
If there are none, we could always come back, but just want to give people the opportunity to ask any questions on this part of the presentation. But if there are none, we're going to keep things going. Okay. There's been none, no questions, correct?
I think let's give it another minute, maybe, just in
Okay.
case.
All right.
Yeah. I think we're good to move and go see.
You got to move. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next slide. So we're gonna pivot a little bit to emerging issues. So we'll focus a little on land use and housing, mobility that Alex will talk about, environmental side. Steve will talk about urban design. I will touch on. So next slide. So what's in front of you on the screen is a plan concept. Plan concept is one of the sort of initial tools we create once we start thinking about an area and how things could be in the future. So briefly to walk you through what's shown on the screen, the dark circles are the BRT stops coming out from the functional plan, Amherst, Inwood, etc. Those shown in the areas shown in red, those are primarily potential mixed-use areas. That's Four Corners, Kemp Mill Shopping Center, the area around WTOP, as well as Amherst. We also highlighted the Housing Opportunities Commission, or HOC. They own three properties within the plan area, including Arcola Towers, and they also own Permanda Court, which is not right next door to Wheaton Forest Local Park. And we also highlighted some of the churches here, such as St. Bernadette, that's located right here, as well as Northwood Presbyterian. And then in blue are some of the existing multifamily developments that are clustered at Arcola. And then along University Boulevard, we've highlighted in yellow potential new housing typologies. And that's something we're going to be digging into more as we continue to work on this plan. And then obviously green are the existing parks or parkland such as Sligo Creek. Next slide. So this is just giving some more words and context to what I've just noted in terms of promoting more mixed uses from existing single-use commercial centers at 29 and University, Arcola regarding Kemp Mill, as well as in the WTOP Amherst area. Thinking about the BRT stops and what are some of the opportunities there in terms of potential changes over time. promoting new infill development at some of the religious institutional properties. So building off that zoning text amendment approved by the council, thinking of different ways that potential changes could occur. We have an example showing you what we mean by infill development. And then retaining residential while promoting new potential typologies along the corridor, and then making some technical corrections based on the work from the district map amendment from 2014. Those are primarily properties where we cannot, again, reestablish the zones when those, the existing zones, we cannot reestablish them again. Next slide. So urban design is a key aspect that links both land use and placemaking together. Today, most of the plans that we've done, prior approvals from the 80s, early 90s, or even from 2001, like the Kemp Mill plan, did not really address urban design. But in terms of that final experience that we all would see once a property redevelops, in terms of from the architecture, from the walking, for you to walk around safely, sort of the creative aspect of the design or the creative features, those are some of the things that really would be integrated regarding the urban design. So as we move forward on the plan development, plan recommendations, later this summer, you'll have an urban design section, and we'll have additional details and recommendations to sort of build upon the land use and zoning recommendations that we'll have, as well as sort of highlighting some creative things that could fall within the placemaking category, where potentially over time you could have new design, unique features that sort of enhance the community even more. Next slide. All right, so some of the emerging land use and zoning ideas, promoting mixed use development, and that's primarily, again, in the Four Corners area. And these are just some examples of, in terms of height, we're thinking primarily between 60 to 70 feet. In terms of the type of mid-rise development, we're thinking about that these are three distinct examples, different parts of the county. On your left is from Shady Grove, Rockville area, right near the Shady Grove Metro Station. The middle image is from the larger Pike and Rose development, just one building there, and then another building from Rockville, Upper Rock development along Shady Grove Road. That's showing 5 levels of multifamily. Next slide. This is within an aerial image of the sort of WTOP, Westchester, Hartstone area, the western end of the plan area. The lines in white, those are the plan area boundary. You have University Boulevard, Wheaton Forest Local Park, Inwood House are some of the key properties that are highlighted here. Next slide. And then again, this is beginning to show you sort of a conceptual urban design framework of what could potentially happen on the WTOP site. We know WTOP, conversations with them, they don't have any current plans to do anything. But again, we're thinking out long term, 15 years, 10 years from today. And if those towers are no longer in use, what could potentially happen there? So on this site, which is seeing in the red, there's some new potential roadway connections, getting you more porosity within the property. There is the historic resource, which is the existing white building that's within the county's master plan for historic resources. So that's untouchable. That's more than an acre of that area sort of set aside because it's historically designated. But then the gray area is showing where the potential development could occur. We're also going to be thinking of having some amount of open space on this property, such as a neighborhood green or some other public type amenity that would be consequential if this property eventually redevelops into the future. Next slide. This is an approved preliminary plan. Approved preliminary plans are one of the development review functions that we have as a department. It's one of the earlier stages of review that the board would act upon once this plan is submitted and goes through the review process. So this is a Gutat synagogue right near Reedy, not too far from WTOP. And a couple years ago, in 22, they received a preliminary plan approval for a 90-unit senior building, which is shown on the lower right portion of this slide, as well as a 22,000 square foot synagogue. So this is an example of an infill, meaning we have development that sort of surrounds it today. But you have one use, which is a synagogue today, could potentially get redeveloped, and you add in additional uses. In this case, it will be the senior building, and then the synagogue will be the lower portion. So this is the preliminary plan that shows the lot one would be the senior building, and then the second lot would be the synagogue. And this is an example of what we think could happen over time for other religious properties along the corridor, in terms of adding more infill, either residential or repositioning their properties. Next slide. So this is the area near Arcola Avenue and University Boulevard near the towers, Arcola, the Warwick, etc. That's existing is on the right, and then on the left portion of the slide, showing you some of the initial concepts that we're thinking of. One is really thinking of how we have multiple properties, how potentially you can get better connections between from Camp Mill Shopping Center down to University Boulevard, for example. And this would only would occur if properties, again, redeveloped. We're thinking out 10, 15, 20 years down the road. But you're beginning to see where potential connections could occur. And then likewise, south portion of University Boulevard, this is the Northwood Presbyterian Church property. We've been in conversations with them that property is up for sale. And we know they're thinking of different alternatives besides the religious use that's there today. And then on the next slide, you will see sort of a more focused concept regarding Northwood Presbyterian. The area in gray, that's the big bubble of says future development. We don't know what can go there, but potentially it could be either multifamily, that 4 to 5, 6-story range, townhouses, duplexes, small apartment buildings, those types of things we're thinking about. And you also see some potential connections. This area has some environmental sensitive areas that you want to protect and retain. So you're seeing existing trails coming out from the Brewood Neighborhood Park here that will begin to take you potentially to Sligo Creek. Today we have a more of a people's choice path. Maybe in the future that could get a bit more formalized. So those are some of the connections and things like that we're thinking about for Northwood Presbyterian. Next slide. And again, thinking about infill at the institutional religious properties, potential changes around the BRT stops, and then promoting different typologies of new residential. So what's shown on the bottom are townhouses from Shady Grove. It's part of the Shady Grove Station West Side development, duplexes from Military Road in Washington, more townhouses from the Shady Grove area, and then 2 over 2, more of a multifamily sort of typology within the city limits of Hyattsville in Prince George's County. Next slide. So in terms of, people always ask, if once the council approves this corridor plan, how soon could things happen? Well, it really depends on each particular property owner, depending on what zones the council will finally approve, sort of acting to either move forward or to stay where they are. There's no requirement for any property owner, if it's a commercial property owner or residential property owner, to do any particular changes for whatever the plan is calling for, because the plan is really long term in nature. So, but what's going to typically happen is approval of the corridor plan by the council, approval of zoning, new zoning for those particular properties. At the end of the day, that would be approved by the council as well. And then any property owner that wants to redevelop, typically given the rules that they currently are, and they're subject to change and further amendments. But typically, you'll have in the commercial residential town zone submission of a sketch plan or a concept plan, a preliminary plan, a subdivision, a site plan, and all those things will get approved by the board with public hearing. And then you'll go to building permits and construction. So there's sort of a broad overview of any private development that will happen after the council has acted on this corridor plan. Next slide. Now I turn it over to Zubin, land use poll.
All right. We have a quick couple of questions that hopefully you can answer with this poll. So on your screens, you should be able to see a poll. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see another question. So when you get a chance, please answer the poll, and we'll leave it up here for a few minutes while everybody gets a chance to answer this. I'm afraid if you're just calling into this meeting using a phone, you cannot answer the question, but I see that we already have over 60% participation here. Right, we are at 90%. I'm just going to give it 10 more seconds. All right, you should be able to see the results of how people have answered these questions. Thank you. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Nkosi.
Okay, thank you for participating in the poll. Next slide. Next, I'll turn it over to Alex, who will talk about the emerging transportation ideas.
Thanks, Nkosi, and thanks for the background on the planning framework. I think that informs a lot of what we're looking at for emerging transportation ideas for the corridor. So as Nkosi mentioned, there are a lot of needs for transportation on the corridor, and so we envision it as a multimodal corridor that would incorporate facilities for travel by all of the major modes, so people driving or traveling as passengers in cars, people taking transit, people walking, and people biking. And so the bus rapid transit piece of that Nkosi described on the transit master plan countywide would primarily be in dedicated lanes over most of this area, but the area in Four Corners would be envisioned in mixed traffic. We're also really focused on safety in the area, and so more complete streets can help make the roadway more walkable and safer for everyone using it. And to help us get there, we're thinking of the Four Corners bicycle and pedestrian priority area. So the bicycle and pedestrian priority areas are one of the key ways that the county funds bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure in the county. And the area around Four Corners is identified and funded for one, and the rest of the corridor is identified as a top priority for bicycle and pedestrian priority areas. Vision Zero is also central to what we're doing, and Vision Zero is the idea that we can eliminate fatalities and severe injury crashes on the corridor. And one of the ways that we'll do that is by suggesting new protected crossing locations, so places where pedestrians can cross the street in a way that would fully bring traffic to a stop before they cross with some sort of traffic control. We're also looking to advance a network of low-stress bicycle facilities. Again, as Nkosi mentioned, this is part of the bicycle master plan for the county, and one of the big pieces of infrastructure there is the bicycle master plan proposes a breezeway side path along the north side of the corridor. In just a moment, I'll show some other emerging ideas that we have, acknowledging that right-of-way is tight in the corridor, and we're trying to keep that right-of-way to a minimum while still providing the facilities that we need to for multiple modes. We're also looking to support micromobility, so thinking of e-scooters, for example, on those facilities, and also looking for alternative ways to navigate the Four Corners area in the longer term. Next slide, please. So this is the emerging transportation idea we have for a general cross-section for University Boulevard. This would apply basically everywhere outside of Four Corners, acknowledging that the right-of-way varies along the corridor, but generally the current master planned right-of-way is somewhere between 124 feet and 150 feet. And this illustration generally shows what we can accomplish in that narrower 124-foot right-of-way. So thinking about the roadway today, there are 6 lanes of traffic and median that also becomes the left turn lane at intersections. But so not so different. While currently the pilot bus only lanes are in place along the curb, not so different from what you see here between the curbs of the roadway. But some of the bigger changes that we're proposing are outside of the curbs of the roadway. So most importantly, the 8-foot planted street buffers provide protection from the adjacent traffic. Some buffer makes it more comfortable for people to walk, bike, and roll along those side paths. And then the side paths themselves, we're currently thinking of 10-foot side paths, one on each side of the roadway. And so, as I just mentioned, our guidance from the bicycle master plan is for a breezeway side path on the right side of the road in this image, which would be even wider. That would be a 16-foot minimum side path. But given the right-of-way constraints, we're considering providing a shared side path on both sides of the street with a slightly narrower dimension to accommodate bicycle and pedestrian travel on both sides of the street. So the next slide gives a little bit more detail about how that lines up to existing conditions. So again, that narrower sidewalk is right up against the travel lanes. Just recently, those were general purpose vehicular travel lanes, but currently those are pilot bus only lanes in a project that MCDOT is leading. And we would envision those bus lanes generally staying in place. I think we still need to put more thought into whether that would be a physically separated bus lane with some vertical separation. The right-of-way is narrow and our space is tight, so that buffer between the bus lane and the vehicular travel lane is narrower than the standards in the Complete Streets Design Guide, but we're hoping to work with our partners at MCDOT to come up with a solution for that. And then the other big point that I wanted to make on this graphic is that generally what we're proposing keeps the existing curbs in place. Once you start moving the curbs, it generally is much more expensive to implement the recommendations. And so we're trying to propose things that are implementable. And then the blue vertical lines show the existing master planned right-of-way of 124 feet, which is what we're trying to keep within. So that includes space for the planting strip, the side path, and a required 2-foot maintenance buffer. Next slide. So this slide just summarizes some of the pros and cons. So again, under the existing condition, the 6-foot sidewalks are narrower than the Complete Streets Design Guide guidance. Our emerging idea is to replace those with 10-foot side paths, I'm showing that in yellow because again, it's not the full 16-foot breezeway side path on one side of the street, but it is providing a higher quality facility on the other side of the street. So overall, this is an improvement over the existing condition. Today, in most places, there's no buffer between pedestrian and bicycle travel and the moving vehicles, and we're proposing an 8-foot buffer that could be planted with street trees. The bus lanes today are 12 feet wide. Ideally, they would be 13, and there's no buffer. And again, looking in the future to have 13 feet of space to work with there. So that could be a 13-foot bus lane or a somewhat narrower lane with somewhat narrower buffer. And then the other point on the vehicular travel lanes is that the existing lanes are all 11 feet wide, and the guidance in the Complete Streets Design Guide is to maintain an 11-foot lane in the outer lane to accommodate some of the larger vehicles and trucks, but narrow the inner lane to 10 feet to help to calm traffic and achieve the target speeds for the roadway. And both the existing and the emerging idea would be within the right of way and maintaining the existing curbs. And finally, maybe this helps to get to one of the questions I saw was about why it takes so long to plan for bike-friendly infrastructure, but really I think this applies to all infrastructure. Either we need some sort of property by property land use change as developers turn that over, or we would be working with a capital improvement project that would be funded at least in part by the county. And so once this corridor plan is approved, a project that would go into the capital improvement project would need to be introduced by the county executive to the capital budget for the 6-year period. And then that budget would also need to be approved by the county council. And at that point, that capital improvement project generally includes funding for a variety of stages of planning, engineering, and design and construction. And so that preliminary engineering and design period could typically take somewhere between 3 and 5 years. And then the final design and construction could be another 3 to 5 years after that. So it does take some time, even beyond the period during which we're planning to implement some of these recommendations. And sorry, I keep saying recommendations, but I just want to clarify again that these are not necessarily the recommendations that are going into the plan at this point. We're looking for input and presenting them as our emerging ideas for the corridor. So yes, on the next slide with that, I think we also have a poll for the transportation idea.
Right, you should see on your screens a quick poll.
And I see a couple questions in the chat that are relevant for this poll, so maybe I can go ahead and answer a couple of those. One was about the proposed side path and how is that different from riding a bicycle on a sidewalk. So a side path is wider than a typical sidewalk. We're proposing 10 feet. Ideally, it would be a little wider than that, but those are facilities that can be shared by people walking and riding bicycles. Bicyclists do need to yield to pedestrians on that, and everyone's encouraged to keep to the right and cyclists to pass carefully around the left after they've signaled that they're going to pass. But it's in one sense quite a bit wider than a typical sidewalk to give a little more room for passing. And then there's another question with concerns about a planted street buffer, and that was the other point I was going to make, is whereas the sidewalks today are against the curb and don't leave much shy distance if a bicyclist needs to pass a pedestrian, the planting strip gives a little more buffer between the people traveling, rolling, walking by bike, between them and the traffic. And then the concern in the comment or question was, could that make things worse by screening bikes from cars that are turning onto a side street? And there are sight distances that need to be maintained at intersections. So the street trees wouldn't come right up into the intersection. There would be some space for motorists who are slowing to make their right-hand turns into neighborhood streets to be able to see the bicyclists. And that we're kind of planning at the high level here. So we're just looking at one cross-section of University Boulevard, but when it gets into that more detailed design, conceptual design, and final design, those kinds of considerations would be taken into account. Thanks for the liberties to answer some of those.
Sure. All right, I think we are at 90%. I'm going to give it like 10 more seconds. If you still have the poll in on your screen, that means it's still open for you. All right. So quickly share results here. So hopefully on your screens, you can see the results of this polling effort. Leave it up here for a few seconds and then ask our environmental planner, Steve, to take on with the next slide. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. The planning department has been including sustainability recommendations in our master plans for a long time. In recent years, the focus of our recommendations has been primarily on protecting natural resources, protecting and expanding tree canopy cover, preserving water quality and air quality. And while we still make recommendations in this master plan in these areas are taking on an added urgency in the face of climate change, which is increasing threats to all of these resources and add some new threats that we have to plan for. There are also some other newer issues that have been coming to light in recent years. These have been recognized in the recent rewriting of our county's general plan, Thrive Montgomery 2050, which provides high-level guidance that all of our master plans must respond to. Specifically, Thrive Montgomery 2050 identifies climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, the protection and preservation of air and water quality, addressing environmental justice issues, preservation of biological diversity, and protecting and improving human health as primary areas of focus for sustainability in our master plans. We also take into account recommendations from the county's climate action plan that are under the purview of the Montgomery County Planning Department and Planning Board. While the recommendations that we deal with are specific to land use planning, and they don't on their own address, they can't get us to net zero on their own, but they play a very critical role in helping the county achieve its climate goals. We try to tailor all of this guidance to the specific development patterns and the existing conditions and characteristics of the area being master planned. In this case, this is the University Boulevard corridor, which has a significant transportation corridor as its central feature. So knowing that, among other things, extreme heat events and intense precipitation are among the dominant impacts of climate change in Montgomery County, we've been using and developing some new tools to be able to analyze the issues and respond to the threats. I want to note the graphics that are on the left side of the screen. The upper graphic is a heat map that was produced under a grant from NOAA and a county-wide effort that was led. The readings were taken about a year and a half ago in August. There was a small army of volunteers that mounted temperature sensors on their cars, and they drove prescribed routes around the county 3 times during the day on a hot day in August. And then that information was taken and applied to a geographic information system layer that's color-coded in a way that I think it's a logical outcome that you might guess. The reddest spots are the hottest spots that were recorded as the vehicles drove around. And the coolest spots are the places that tend to have more forest, less impervious area, and they tend to be our stream valleys. In the center, the narrower stream valley there is Sligo Creek, but it gets cooler along that corridor. To the right, the bigger, greener corridor is the Northwest Branch Stream Valley. And the spots that tend to poke out most as the hot spots, not surprisingly, are areas that have a lot of impervious surface, not a whole lot of shade, and those actually tend to be our schools and some of the other larger institutional properties that have those conditions. The lower graphic actually then shows an area where the tree canopy cover exists. The red boundary there is the plan area on each of those images. And the majority of the tree canopy cover tends to be in the established neighborhoods and in our parks. So based in part on this information and in the goals outlined in Thrive and on our climate action plan, some of our emerging sustainability ideas for the University Boulevard Corridor Plan include creating this multimodal transportation spine along University Boulevard, and incorporating into that cross-section tree canopy and other shade features, stormwater management, and vegetated landscaping strips in order to reduce runoff and to protect the people who are walking, riding bicycles, and who are sitting waiting at those bus stops, to try to protect them from extreme heat and pollution. And while we can't protect all the trees in the forests in the plain area, we want to be intentional about trying to save them wherever we can, because existing trees and forests provide higher levels of environmental benefits, including reducing heat island effect, reducing runoff, storing carbon, and filtering out air pollution. Want to add a note about that. Among the research we've been following recently are studies that show that trees are effective at filtering out a particular kind of pollution called PM 2.5 pollution. It's a microfine particulate pollution, 2.5 microns or smaller. And those have been implicated in a variety of health problems, not only, as you might expect, asthma and other pulmonary diseases, but heart disease, and even cardiometabolic diseases like higher incidences of diabetes. We also went to work with Montgomery County Public Schools and owners of other large properties that show up as these hotspots on our mapping to find ways to help mitigate heat island effect in the area. And we want to promote the use of landscaping designed to intercept and detain runoff on public and private properties, including programs like the Rainscapes program, which is run by the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. This would help address an emerging problem with increased localized flooding. It's often called lot-to-lot flooding. That may affect really localized areas, could be road segments in a certain place, yards, and the basements of homes that lie below other lots and can flood in the intense rainstorms we're experiencing more and more frequently. So with that, those are just a few of the emerging sustainability ideas we're working with. And now I believe we have a poll, also have some questions we'd like to ask you about sustainability.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to quickly get a poll up for the environmental issues and sustainability issues that we have discussed. Hopefully, people can see a poll on their screens now.
I think there are 3 questions on that poll, so if you need to scroll down
Yeah,
the scroll bar on the
brilliant.
right to see the bottom question, you can scroll down to see that.
Thanks, Steve. All right, we are at about 80% participation. I'm going to give it maybe 10 more seconds. Or maybe a little more, given that we have 3 questions here. All right, I'll quickly share the results here. And again, since we have 3 questions, you might have to scroll up and down to view the results of the last question. All right, thank you. With that, I'll bring Nkosi back.
A couple more slides before we wrap the presentation. So we're continuing to work on this plan. We've sort of slowed things down a little bit, but still to come is later this summer will be the sort of initial preliminary recommendations, summer/fall preliminary recommendations, and then getting to the board with a working or staff draft, and then eventually getting that hopefully approved by the board to become the public hearing draft. And that's when the public is invited to provide formal testimony to the board on the document. And then after that process, after the public hearing, we'll go through with the board, section by section, topic by topic, all aspects of the draft plan. The board will make their own changes, and then eventually we'll have a planning board draft, and then that gets sent to the county executive and the county council. So the council has the final up and down vote. The county executive will do a fiscal impact on the plan's recommendations, which will be included in the county council's deliberation. A small subset of the county council members will review the planning board draft, and then they will make, again, their own changes, and then the full council will eventually review what that small subset of council members did, and then a final up and down vote on the plan. And then following the plan will be the zoning piece to follow, sectional map amendment that will sort of confirm all the different changes from a zoning perspective that a council did. So that's still to come later this year into 2025 regarding this plan. So next slide. So this is our website. This presentation, additional information will be on the website, as well as our contact information for myself, as well as Zubin. So we've done meetings in people's backyards. We've gone to civic groups. If you want us to chat with you, if you're a property owner, either residential or commercial, please reach out to us. We're willing to have either in-person or virtual conversations with you. And I believe the next slide just says Q&A. So with that, Zubin, I'll turn it over to you because I know questions have been coming in, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Thanks, Nkosi. And I think I'm gonna pull Alex in on the first question here. Just as a quick side note, like we have had a lot of questions come in, and I know staff has been answering some of those questions as they come in through via chat. So for some of your questions, you might see them as answered in the Q&A tab. But Alex, I have this first question for you, and I'm going to take a second here to read it. it says much of the new development in the county seems to lack focus on how traffic will exponentially increase for existing residents. Imposing new residences, walking, biking areas, and busways onto streets will, with critical retail coming much later, if at all, traffic to simply buy groceries is choked in Wheaton now. And now is emphasized. And I have felt unsafe at the metro station for all of 20 years living here. These two issues seem completely absent from all the charrette presentations I have attended, which is all of them. So I would like to thank this resident for participating in all these meetings, but would love for you to address these concerns, Alex. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Subin. So yeah, I guess starting with the question about the relationship between development in the county and vehicular traffic, that's definitely something that we're taking into consideration as we make and then evaluate our recommendations. So as part of the master plan process, we have transportation adequacy metrics that we perform travel forecasting on the land use recommendations and transportation network recommendations that we're making to evaluate their effects on a variety of things, including vehicular traffic, but also accessibility, the effects on transit network, et cetera. So specifically to the traffic consideration, that is something we're thinking about. So we'll have analysis of our existing condition, of a future year baseline condition that evaluates what would happen in the year 2045 if we don't move ahead with this plan. So based on what the existing master plan is and all of the zoning and infrastructure plans that are in place. And then to evaluate the ideas that we have in this plan, we'll also be performing analysis to be able to make that apples to apples comparison in the future. So that is something we'll think about. Yeah, certainly I empathize with challenges in getting around the area from time to time, but I we'll be thinking about ways to ensure that people still can travel by auto in the future while also having other options available, whether that's transit, improved walking and biking to places like Wheaton that that kind of bookend the corridor. I don't know if others might want to chime in on the safety question at Metro. I'm not sure that's something we can directly address. I can certainly share that concern with WMATA. I know that they've been putting a lot of effort into safety at metro stations lately. But I don't know, I'll ask if anyone else from the group wants to speak to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I see Carrie Sanders, our division chief, has joined. So Carrie, if you want to add a little bit to that, that'll be great.
Sure. Thanks so much for the questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer each one. Regarding Metro, that is an issue that we can pass along to WMATA, Metro Washington, essentially to share the concerns about safety at the Wheaton Metro Station. We have been in touch with WMATA pretty regularly to ensure that there is police presence at that location. The other thing is that the Red Line will be closing over the summer for maintenance work as it relates to the Purple Line installations. And so during that time as well, we have been understanding from WMATA that they'll still be monitoring the parking garages at the Wheaton Metro Station, even during that closure. They'll still have police in the parking garage areas. But we appreciate the feedback, and we'll be sure to relay that to WMATA. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Alex. Alex, I'm going to keep you here for the next few questions. So the question is, does the plan involve new roadway construction along University?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so again, maybe going back to that sort of process diagram of the recommendations going forward. Yes, eventually, so the emerging idea that's presented, if that goes forward, there would be construction to implement that. Primarily outside of the existing curbs. There would probably need to be some construction if there was a physical separation between the transit lane and the general purpose travel lanes. But that emerging idea as it's presented tonight, the idea would be to minimize that construction and that we would not need to completely reconstruct the roadway. It would still be within the curb to curb width that exists today, and would just be modifying sort of the allocation of the space for lanes in between.
Great. I think the next question's for you too, and maybe some of our other divisional partners can join in, which is, will the current kind of bus, bike, red line be continued as part of the design?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the emerging idea that was shared tonight is fairly consistent with the existing pilot bus only lanes. I think the change that we might be considering is whether to provide some sort of physical separation between the bus lane and the drive lanes. Today, that's just indicated with striping, with paint on the pavement. Andrew Bossy with MCDOT, I believe, is here with us this evening, and the pilot bus only lane project that's in place right now is a pilot project that MCDOT is leading. Andrew, I don't know if you could say anything about that project.
Yeah, they're collecting data right now on how well it's working, and I'm not sure of the timeline offhand for processing data and making a decision, but it's in place for the now, and data collection's ongoing.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So yeah, as those data become available or findings from that project, we'll take those into consideration in our recommendations, and so that might be more of an intermediate term thing, whereas this is a longer term vision. So a bit TBD on that.
Great. Alex, thanks for answering these questions. I'm sure we'll pull you back in, but I think the next question, I'm going to send it over to Lisa Gavoni, who's our housing planner. The question is, will the current residents, and in parentheses it says homeowners and or renters, be displaced by any of these plans?
Sure. So that's a great question. I'm going to answer the homeowners piece first because it's a little bit easier. So the plan and attainable housing strategies, which is the initiative that Nkosi talked about earlier in the presentation, that would allow more diverse housing types like duplexes and triplexes in single family neighborhoods. The plan and that initiative may provide homeowners options should they elect to do so with their property. There's nothing that would force the mechanism to force a homeowner to sell their home. So that answers that question. And for renters, it's a little bit more complicated. So we talked a little bit about the older housing stock in the plan area, and that may eventually come to the end of its useful life, and that may require redevelopment. How the Housing Opportunities Commission, which is a key property owner in this plan area, which is the county's quasi governmental public housing authority, they often at the, when it's necessary, they redevelop their properties and then they increase the number of affordable housing on their properties. That may be an option for this plan that we are thinking about in our big ideas. What we would do as the planning department is we would include language in our plan that would elect to mitigate as much as possible the effects of temporary relocation in the event of redevelopment. We would also include language in our plans that applicants have to work with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs and us to really plan for the right to return for these residents should redevelopment occur. We strive to include the strongest language in our plans possible to really protect the rights of tenants and to ensure that they can come back in the event of redevelopment. And we really do, that is a really important key issue for us at the planning department that we've worked on refining in our past couple of master plans over the recent years.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And since you addressed the issue of renters, I think we have a question here from a renter. It says, the person says, will some of these housing types improve home ownership opportunities? As a renter, I would like to buy a house, but don't want a condo apartment and can never afford a house. Thanks.
Sure, so that's another great question. I would say that we're working, especially through the attainable housing initiatives and to the extent possible through this master plan, is working on creating opportunities for home ownership. And that means things like making it easier to subdivide, making it easier to build a fee simple property like a duplex or a townhouses, because we know that size has a big impact on affordability. The average detached home in Montgomery County costs on average nearly $1 million, where attached structures like townhouses are only around, 400,000. So that there's a big part that, like, if we can build more townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, more types of housing in places like University Boulevard, it will do a lot to create more affordable housing types for homeownership in the community.
That's a good segue into sort of a next concern that somebody expresses here. And I might pull in Carrie Sanders in for this one. So the question is, it's almost like a kind of complete sentence here, which is and won't adding more housing create more needs for vehicular traffic? Folks in the trades, etc., need their cars, with transit safety being a little questionable at the moment, and Metro becoming more expensive quarterly. How do you see this as being helpful?
Thank you for the question. And I think this really ties nicely in kind of what is the purpose of a corridor plan. So a plan such as this seeks to create more development along like existing infrastructure that already has a lot of investment happening to it. So this corridor is going to have a bus rapid transit network, which is really going to help move people along this corridor, already a very well-used bus corridor, and not only in the county, but also in the state of Maryland. So that's going to be invested in heavily through this new bus rapid transit network, which will have several stops along the 5-mile corridor. And whenever we have these opportunities to pair infrastructure improvements with new housing, it's a really, really good opportunity to actually make the traffic conditions improve, because we have the opportunity for people to perhaps switch over to another way of moving about. It could be taking the new bus rapid transit. It could be walking, rolling, and biking. So these infrastructure improvements, when we pair them with new housing, it's a really great way to actually improve trips for all people. And not only that, but when we have what we call like a mix of uses, where we have housing with perhaps some corner stores or other opportunities where people could literally, walk to grab a gallon of milk instead of have to get in their car to do that, that also reduces trips too. So we understand this happens over time. It doesn't happen overnight. Individual property owners will need to actually take the initiative, assuming that this plan moves forward and the zoning is approved, meaning what you can build on a given lot by law is approved by the county council. Then it would actually be up to the property owners to take that initiative. Some property owners might decide that they don't want to change their property, and others may decide they do. But this is an opportunity for us to pair this new development with infrastructure, and so we can improve multimodal transportation for this area.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Alex, I think this is time for you to come join us again. So I think I'm going to take this question about e-bikes first, which is e-bikes are often ridden too fast. Where will they be allowed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this question was asked last time, and unfortunately I don't have a precise answer for this. I believe that if they are a certain class, which I think is class 1, if my memory serves me correctly, so bikes that are under 20 miles an hour, or I think it's also bikes that are only pedal assist, so the motor is only running when you're pedaling the bike, are allowed, generally where bicycles are allowed. And I know Parks has a separate policy about e-bikes on trails, and I believe they're allowed there too in Parks.
Yeah, I think class 1 is the sort of just the assist, and class 2 is the hybrid, and class 3 are the sort of the fastest e-bikes. And I think there are some regulations against them in the county and across the country, actually. So, so the next question is, will there be better access for crossing the road. Currently, the safe pedestrian crossings are too far apart and are a barrier for bus use.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And as I kind of alluded to with the Vision Zero and safety considerations on the roadway, that's definitely a priority of our efforts, is to make the whole corridor safer and more comfortable for people walking and biking and crossing the roadway as well. So the Complete Streets Design Guide also provides guidance on crossing spacing depending on the context of the roadway. And so many places in the corridor today, the protected crossings are farther apart than the guidance in the Complete Streets Design Guide. So we'll be looking to implement crossings, protected crossings, closer together to provide more opportunities for folks to cross the street safely.
Great. I think I've seen that staff has answered nearly 24 questions in the chat. So we are almost at the end of questions here. But yeah, if you have any final questions from the community, please add them to the Q&A tab. And we have a little bit more time here, so I think I'll give it a few minutes before we close. There's a comment here about the street buffer, and the person expresses hope that the street buffer is not grass, as it's ubiquitous throughout the county. They're typically overgrown and require gas polluting mowing and wasteful use of taxpayer money. So yeah, I think that's a good point. So yeah, before we close, we have one more question before we close. And Nkosi, maybe I'll pull you in for this one, which is, will zoning or does zoning permit an apartment or a multifamily dwelling to be built on any current single family housing property in the UBC?
Well, based on the ZTA that was approved by the council, yes, you could build a townhouse or multifamily structure on the religious owned properties, which are either within the R60 or R90 zones in the corridor. Obviously, this is different than if you have a house on a lot today, which has different parameters and standards. But based on the ZTA approved by the council, you could build a multifamily on a residentially zoned property that's owned by a religious use or a private educational institution.
Thanks, Nkosi. And as you can see, we have our website up here. I'll also share the link of our interactive website in the chat, and you can go there and add a comment, or there's a map there also where you can actually put a pin on the map and add a comment on the map. So if you want to share your ideas, have questions, feel free to use that website. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica for some closing thoughts.
Thank you, Zubin. Thanks to all of you for being here with us this evening and for asking these great questions. In terms of our next steps, we have been posting materials from the last few meetings on our website, which is shown on the link here. And as Zubin mentioned, we also do have the ability to provide written comments on the emerging ideas via the link that Zubin just shared. As Nkosi mentioned earlier, if you, if you or your neighbors or your friends want to invite us to come out and talk with you, either sort of, in person or virtually or through your homeowners association, your civic association, your community group, we're happy to do so. In terms of next steps, over the course of the summer, we will be thinking through these emerging ideas that we have shared with you this evening, and then starting to develop preliminary recommendations. It is our intent to come back to you in the fall with those recommendations for your review and for your thoughts and feedback. If you haven't signed up for our e-letter, please go to our website and sign up for that e-letter to make sure that you receive notifications of things that are upcoming. When we release preliminary recommendations, when we're scheduled to come back to you, please make sure that you go to our website and sign up. And we hope that you will be willing to stay engaged with us. And thanks for your time this evening.
Thanks, Jessica. I've also put the e-letter sign up link in the chat. So with that, I think we're done for the evening. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you at the next one. Thanks.